Hi, this is Izzuddin Ismail from the RunCloud show, where we talk to PHP programmers from around the world and find out what they do with PHP. So now we have Ed Finkler with us from
Mhm.
where you are right now, Ed?
I live in West Lafayette, Indiana, in the United States.
All right, nice. All right, you do know where I'm at right now, right?
You're in Malaysia, is that correct?
Yeah. So I'm we're doing this. I'm doing this from Malaysia, Kuala Lumpur, and
Oh,
it's
okay.
about I think it's a 12-hour time difference, more or less. I think.
Yes, I think it's tomorrow where you are.
Yeah, that's right. All right. So in the RunCloud show, we talk to PHP programmers, in which you are yourself. So, and let's just get started from the very beginning about how did you discover PHP and how you got into it.
Yeah. So that's a good question. I originally I started doing web stuff, but I was only into sort of like HTML, CSS, things like that. I did get a computer science degree or a minor in computer science in university, but I wasn't very good at it. In fact, I was really bad at it, and it wasn't good. But when I was a teenager, I liked doing zines like these self-published, like you would photocopy them, like you basically make your own little magazines, but they were very cheaply made, and it would be about like music or video games or stuff like that. So I made those kinds of things. So
So,
and I was pretty into like layout and stuff like that at the time, like design stuff.
what was your zine about?
I did a few different ones, but it was mostly about. At first, I did video game zines, like about the Sega Genesis,
Mm-hmm.
or it was called the Mega Drive everywhere but the U.S. So the Sega Mega Drive, or I also did some stuff about music, like different bands and things like that. A lot of like electronic music that was from like the '90s and things like that. That you probably have never heard of, I'm quite certain. And it's because they weren't like popular bands. It was all sort of like underground stuff.
Yeah,
And
I think that
so I
was.
did a lot of stuff like that.
Yeah, I think during those days there was a lot of zines going around by fans and whatnot. Right? I think those also happen here in Malaysia as well, where the underground
Yeah,
bands, the indie bands, and fan would
yeah,
do the zines or cover events with the zines. So that happened here as
right.
well.
Yeah, it was. There was a real. The '90s were sort of like the peak of this amateur publishing movement that people had, and it's sort of like the web kind of replaced that, right?
Mm,
So people, and now there is still like a niche of like people who make their own physical fanzines or physical zine publishing stuff. But for the most part, people just they find their information about bands and concerts and or things like reviews of video games or things like that. They just find those things online. Anybody can start a website and just do that themselves. But I was super into that. I really enjoyed that stuff, and for a while I thought I was going to be a writer. And I actually had some stuff published in a few magazines, like professional magazines, right? Some like reviews and things like that. But for the most part, what I found was that I actually enjoyed like putting together the layouts and stuff and making that like what it looked like visually. I like that a lot better than actually writing. So I ended up doing more of that, and I did web stuff that way too. So I kind of got into the web when I was in college because that would have been 1990. I started college in 1993, so about 1995 I first probably messed around with a web page and started looking into that. So it was just HTML stuff back then,
mm-hmm.
and started building stuff that way. And I actually got a job out of college, just doing HTML, and I think CSS might have been a thing right getting close to that time. So this would have been like 97, 98. And but I really wasn't a programmer. I didn't know much about that. I knew I could mess around a little bit with JavaScript, but I really didn't understand the rest of the stuff. But I did know how to do HTML, CSS, stuff like that. The difference was I got to a point where I wanted to do something. I can't remember exactly what this application did, but it was a little thing where I wanted to I think it was like a form you filled out, and it calculated some stuff for you to like see, like, I think it was like a calorie counter app, kind of like
Ah,
a diet app or something like that. It was just, I was like, oh yeah, I could do that with a web page. And I started doing it in JavaScript, and I wrote it in JavaScript, and JavaScript would like read the values out of the form fields and then fill in the values in the things that would say, okay, it's this amount of calories or whatever, right? That's all fine. The problem was that, you have to remember, this was like 1998, 1999. There was no persistence with JavaScript. So it wouldn't save anything. You reload the page and it would all go away, right?
right.
And so a friend of mine said, you should try using PHP because I heard that's good for web stuff, right? And he had started using it, a friend of mine named John Madison. And he worked with me at that company, but he was an actual programmer and systems administrator. And he said, you should try using PHP. And so I started looking at that because I wanted something that could actually save the data.
Mm-hmm.
And you could do that with PHP with a database, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I could have saved it a bunch of different ways, but at the time it was like, oh, I could put it in a database.
Mm-hmm.
So that's really all that, and that's usually the way that I've always learned everything, is that I had some project I wanted to make, and I had to learn how to do something for the purposes of that project. So this would have been, I know it was PHP version 3 that I used at first. It was probably a later version of PHP 3. And so it was pre-PHP 4. I know that. And that was how I got started on it. And then PHP let me do stuff, and I could do things that were powerful and important and solve problems for me really quickly and easily in a way that there wasn't anything else like that out there. And it was really easy to get PHP up and running and to do stuff with it compared to other languages. So that was good for me. That was really good for me. It had a very shallow learning curve. Now, was I writing good code? No, I was not writing good code. But admittedly, most people at that time weren't writing very good code in PHP, and that was sort of like the norm for it. It was the case that you wrote. For years I wrote stuff where it was like, okay, you have you put your database connection information at the top of the page, and I thought about it very much like a page, where you have each page corresponds to a PHP file in the website. So you do that, and and so you have to have for each single page, you have to have a database connection at the top, and then maybe if you're really smart, you only make that database connection code once, and you include it in all your files,
right,
and stuff like that. So all this kind of like cheap kind of stuff that it's not very like now I'm like, oh my gosh, anytime I see code like I wrote 15 years ago, it's terrible, right? It's just awful stuff. But that's how I got started, and I think a lot of people get started that way, and that's how I started doing it. And the thing I liked about PHP was that it was designed to do what I wanted to do, which was to make web stuff, and it let me do that quickly and easily and in a very straightforward way. So it was really good for that time and that period. And PHP, sort of like modern PHP development looks pretty different now, but I've kind of stuck with it, and I know it really well, and it works. So I'm pretty happy with it. It works out well for what I want to do. But that's really how I got started. And so I worked for 4 years at a company that was it was actually a video and interactive production company, and then I ended up taking a job. I took a job at a university nearby, Purdue University, which is actually here in town where I live now. And I worked for a computer security research center as their web and FTP archive person for about 9 years. And so I did that for, so that's like 13 years right there of my career was doing that stuff. And
what do you do with that web and FTP archive? What do you do?
Well, it ended up that it was basically the FTP archive stuff was they had a very long-running FTP site that had lots of information about computer security stuff in it. Things like just all sorts of stuff like programs to download, not illegal stuff, things like that, but things that were used for testing security, or like dictionary files for things like password checking and things of that nature. So it had a very historical. There's a lot of historical data on there. And then the other thing that you had was just maintaining all of their web presence. So for all the events they had going on, I had to make sure those things worked. Tracking information about the students who were involved with the center, and tracking information about the professors that were with the center, and things of that nature. And I did a bunch of things with it. I used different tools, like I used WordPress early on, like WordPress version 1. I used Expression Engine as a content management system. I wrote a thing that like automatically generated forms to edit the database information, which was just a complete nightmare. It's just terrible. But I used it for years and years and years, and then at the same time, I also did some side work too. So as sort of as a consultant, because you could do that, and I did make a ton of money at the university, and I had time to do other stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So I basically just kind of kept learning different things. The first time I used sort of what you might call a more MVC style framework was I used CodeIgniter, and I think that was in CodeIgniter 1 point something. And that was a big difference. That was a big change, and it was around that time I started using CodeIgniter. And I also did some stuff because I was at the Security Research Center that I kind of bled over, and I started doing a few like security related things for PHP. Like I created a tool called PHP Sec Info. That was a tool that would sort of like look at your PHP environment and try to give you advice on how to make it more secure.
Oh, wow.
So it would look at like the environment, like what are the settings that you have for PHP and stuff like that, that it would give you advice based on that. I also wrote a tool or a library for taking input and validating or sanitizing it, and also outputting stuff correctly, things like that. It was called Inspect with a K, INSPEKT. And I think some people still use that, but I haven't kept that up for quite a while. So I did some security related stuff, and and then with that security related stuff, I ended up actually starting to talk at some conferences.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So some early PHP conferences and the O'Reilly's open source conference, things like that. So that was probably about 2006, 2007. I started talking at some of those. So, and then, since then it's just been, I keep doing different stuff. I spent a bunch of time doing a bunch of JavaScript and desktop and mobile JavaScript stuff back when this would have been like 2008. I did a Twitter client called Spaz. That was a desktop client that was all written in JavaScript and HTML and CSS. And then I wrote it was the same application I wrote for the Palm WebOS devices. I don't know if you remember those.
Yeah, I remember those.
Yeah, right. So I wrote one of the
Palm
Twitter
Pilot.
clients. Yeah. So it was after the Palm Pilot. They did a thing called WebOS that was all the applications were written in HTML, CSS, and JavaScript.
Oh, okay.
And so it was like the last things that Palm did, and then they got bought by HP, and subsequently HP like tanked the whole thing. So that kind of went to poop. But it was a pretty long running open source project that I did called Spaz. That was a JavaScript Twitter client, and I did that for a long time. Learned a lot about JavaScript, and then I also left the university. I went and worked in the private sector and I've been doing that ever since, and working remotely. So I worked for a few years at a company called Fictive Kin, which is like a consultancy that's pretty cool. And they and there I did a bunch of stuff, a bunch of PHP stuff and a bunch of Python stuff too, because we ended up doing a lot of Python web development. And then I've kind of after that gotten back into PHP. And PHP, when coming back to it, sort of after doing Python for a while, it was like in a much better state than it was when I left. Like I kind of left for a couple of years. I didn't do as much, and PHP is a lot better now than it was before. I think Composer was a really, really huge tool that changed a lot of things. It changed this focus on, PHP for a long time was very focused on frameworks and like these big monolithic frameworks that you sort of had to learn exactly how they worked, and it was only and the things you would learn were only applicable to that framework. And so you had to adapt this like huge, massive piece of thing to do stuff with it to get quality code. And I think the big thing that Composer has changed is it's changed the focus to being about writing components that are high quality, but you can take those and use them any way you want to. So there's a much stronger emphasis on quality components, about making it easy to find those components. You can use Composer and packages to find things easily, and the testing and quality that goes into code coverage, that goes into just like writing the code, is just a lot better now. So I don't have to go around and try to find like a zip file to download and like dump some PHP include files someplace. I can use Composer and it manages all my packages for me, and that's just a huge difference. Like from when I started doing PHP and the way it is now, it's much easier. It's in some ways it's more complex, but in some ways it's a lot easier to get high quality stuff. It used to be you had to search all around, and it was really haphazard and kind of, again, you would just grab some code and throw it in and see what happens, And now it's a lot better. It's a much better. It's the package manager, I think, has been the biggest thing that's improved stuff, and that is really, I came back to PHP because of Composer. Like I don't think I'd be doing PHP now if it wasn't for Composer and how it changed the ecosystem.
So it's interesting to know that you've done PHP, and then you took a break for a while and do a lot more Python, and then you came back to PHP.
Yeah.
If at that point in time, from what you know then, when you moved back into PHP, how do you think Python compares to PHP?
Well, Python is a better language, and it's better in the sense that it's a much better designed language because, and it is because of there's a difference between the nature of how PHP's project operates versus the way that most other projects operate. That PHP is very anarchic, and anyone can contribute to it, and you don't sort of have a single person who has a vision for the language, or a single group of people who have a vision for the language. You have anybody can contribute, anybody can make the changes they want to, and there is a process now for like making RFCs and proposing changes and stuff like that, but it's still anybody can propose those changes. So it's very much like if you want to contribute, you can contribute. You just have to show the motivation. So PHP has always been anarchic, and that's what's great about it, and that's what's like terrible about it too, right? It is the nature of it, and it's what makes it what it is. And like I said, it's great and it's bad. Python is not like that. Python is a much more clearly designed language. It doesn't mean that it's not a huge project and it still has warts, and every language does. But Python as a language is a much better designed language. But Python is not a web language. It is designed to be a general purpose programming language. And so, it's just different. I feel like I can get stuff done kind of faster with PHP, and it's easier to get PHP stuff running, I think. Python is still a very good tool, and at this point in my career, I would just say I keep sticking with PHP because I think it does a really good job, and I don't have a strong enough reason to choose something else. But, Python has a lot of great frameworks. It has a lot of great, platforms like Django or Flask. or lots of other kinds of tools. It's very high quality. There's some things it does really well. There's some areas that PHP does a better job, like in certain kinds of, writing certain kinds of things and stuff like that. Python is way better for asynchronous processing, but that's just because PHP just has never had a strong need to support that. But it doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. It's just that Python has way more like mature solutions for asynchronous processing. But it's just different, right? And there's still a huge amount of things that you can do with PHP that will do great, and no one who uses your stuff is ever going to care whether it's written in PHP or Python or Ruby or Go or whatever it is. They don't care. The point is, do you get stuff done with it or not?
Right.
If I were telling somebody like right now, like I want to learn how to program, I probably would tell them to start with Python because I think it's the most straightforward. Like it's an easy language to pick up. It's pretty consistent. It doesn't have a lot of weird quirks to it. But somebody who was like, I want to build web pages right now, I might tell them to look at PHP. It just depends on sort of what they want to do because it's definitely more work to get Python running as like an application server, and then you have a server that it connects to, and like the deployment problem is harder with Python, and it's even harder still with like Ruby or other languages. Whereas with PHP, it's really easy to get your stuff deployed, and I think that makes a huge difference in a lot of cases. So PHP sure isn't going anywhere. I mean, there's no way. It is deeply embedded and runs tons and tons and tons of websites. Like large percentages of the web runs on PHP,
Right.
if not like most of the web. And but it's interesting that PHP, that's primarily because of things like WordPress and Drupal. Sort of projects that oftentimes you'll go to those places and they don't sort of think, you'll go to like a conference and they don't necessarily think of themselves as PHP developers. They think of themselves as Drupal or WordPress developers. But PHP is the engine that drives that stuff, and it's not going away. And I think that there's work that's been done on frameworks like the newer Zen stuff, Slim, and Laravel, all of that really, really high quality stuff that I think are really, really good options for building modern web applications with. So I think it's in good shape. I think PHP I'm really happy with it. But like I said, I mean, I think you can pick whatever you feel like, and it's fine. It's just whatever you want to do. There's certain advantages and disadvantages. So if you were like, I'm going to write something that's going to do a bunch of asynchronous processing, you might want to use Python just because there's just more support for that natively. There are just way more solutions for it. But if that wasn't a big thing and you were just like, I want to build a web application, PHP is a really good base for it because there's just tons and tons of really high quality stuff. Like you pick Laravel or you pick something like the Zen framework or things like that. Those things it's just really high quality stuff that's going to solve a ton of problems for you very quickly.
Yeah. I think a lot of the changes in PHP or not recently was namespacing and composer.
I think those things made a huge difference, and so it was really PHP 5.3 and Composer. I think those dramatically changed everything.
Right. So first you were in that video production company agency, and then you were in the Purdue University. And then you work with what was the third one?
Oh, Fictive Kin, which is a consultancy that is still around, they're kind of based in New York City, but it's geographically distributed. So I worked remote for them and have been working remote ever since. And then after Fictive Kin, I did a couple other gigs, and most recently I've been at Graph Story. I've been the CTO there for a while.
Right. Let's talk about working remotely. So
yeah, sure.
A lot of programmers, when they start going into the job marketplace, of course they work in an office. Normally, I think it's normal that people start working by working in an office and whatnot.
Yeah.
And depending on the company that they interviewed with and the job offer that they get, but I think that's a normal route. But when it comes to working remotely, how is that like? Is that like a challenge or uh, anything?
It's not, there are challenges. I think that I know it, like what works and what doesn't pretty well. The biggest challenges are, can you keep yourself motivated to do your work in the environment wherever you end up? And so that's been a thing of figuring out what environments work for me to keep working. And like some people work at home, I can't work at home at all. I have to leave the house
Mm.
and I have to come to a co-working studio to actually do my work. Um, but at the same time, the other side of it is really it's a team communication issue.
Ah,
And are you good at keeping in touch with people? Are you willing to jump on a quick video conference if you need to figure something out? Because sometimes it's just faster to do that.
mm-hmm.
Um, are you connected via IRC or Slack all the time during normal business hours so that you can get, and do you talk out problems in chat instead of like people having side conversations? Those are all sort of factors that bring in, what when remote works or it doesn't work. I think there has to be a commitment on everyone's part to make remote working something that's viable with a team. And if there isn't that commitment, it doesn't work. It has to be everybody and it can be particularly hard if you have a team that's sort of split, like some people are remote and some people aren't. You have to
Oh,
be more you have to be more disciplined in that case, because you have some people. It's really easy for the people who are right next to each other to have conversations, and then the people who aren't right there don't know what's going on.
mm-hmm.
And that's like that's the thing that I definitely have run into, and that makes that kind of tough. But it depends on the job, it depends on the workplace, and it's really a culture and communication issue. um, I think it helps a lot. I think that it helps a lot if you have been doing it a while. I tend to feel like more senior people can do remote a little better, but it doesn't mean that, like, say, people who are just getting started can't do
Get
it.
to it, yeah.
It just means that the company really has to be committed to making sure that they are mentoring. It's a lot easier to mentor if you're sitting next to somebody than
Mm-hmm.
if you're just online. So you have to make a commitment to using the best solutions possible to do that, particularly for more junior developers, I think.
So, in your time when you've been doing work remotely, have you dealt with how diverse are your team members when it comes to time zone? Are they spread out?
So that's a big thing. My tendency is if it's stuff that I have to work closely with the people,
Mm-hmm.
it can be really hard if their time zone is like, say, even
Like you
four
and
or
I.
5 hours off. Yeah, and it doesn't mean that you and I couldn't do good work, but we'd have to work completely asynchronously, right? You
Mm-hmm.
do your work and I do my work. But the time when we have to talk,
Mm-hmm.
unless you work like very odd hours, like you're up after midnight, like you
Mm-hmm.
are right now,
Mm-hmm.
um, that makes it really hard. That makes it really hard to like have conversations throughout the day, like just check with somebody. Hey, if I just knew this piece of information, I could keep working. And
Mm.
it should take 5 minutes, but I'm stuck because I can't get that information because that person is asleep right now, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that, I think, the time zone thing can be an issue, and it doesn't mean it's impossible,
Right.
but you have to structure like how you're going to work and the expectations you have. Like, you're going to have to be able to do more self-contained work
Mm-hmm.
and have control over that. And because if you are like working sort of in lockstep with somebody else, you have to be able to talk to them during the work time. And you
Mm-hmm.
can do that remotely, but if you're on completely different time zones, I think that's really hard to do.
Mm-hmm.
So I would say the time zone thing can be an issue. It's just a matter of figuring out how you're going to do the work. If it's like, here's the specs, go run off and do the work,
Mm-hmm.
and come back to me when you have something. Well, that's something that is less time zone dependent. But if it's something that's like we're working together and I'm doing this part, you're doing that part, and they have to work together,
Mm-hmm.
like that gets a lot harder.
Right.
Especially if you're like trying to figure out like how's this going to work and how's this going to work, and you need to have those conversations. So I prefer to be only like 1 or 2 hours off at most. I think it gets hard. I think it gets hard for me otherwise. But I've known people who are spread across the world who don't have that problem. So I certainly know companies who have successfully pulled that off.
Right.
And I think that's definitely a thing that can work. It just depends. It just depends on what works for you and what doesn't.
Mm-hmm. So I guess when you said you work remotely, but you don't work from home. So I guess that
Yeah.
varies from an individual to another. Then.
Yes. I can't do that. I just can't, because I can't focus on work when I'm in that environment. My home environment is not where I work. And so I have a lot of trouble with being at home and trying to work. But at the same time, there's a lot of people who are totally fine with it. So that's just me.
Mm-hmm.
I would rather, I want to be in a different environment, and I don't like being isolated. I kind of like being around people. So a co-working studio is perfect for me.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas for some people it might not be that great. But I like being around. I like being around people, and I like being around. And having opportunities to be social is important to me. So even though I work remote, I like to sort of be around people. And luckily, we have a really good co-working studio, which is where I am right now, and it works great. And so I love it.
All right. So what are you working on right now?
So the big thing that I'm working on right now is a project called Open Sourcing Mental Illness, and that is a nonprofit organization that's basically dedicated to creating a culture of mental wellness within the tech industry.
Okay.
So what we do is we raise awareness about it by talking about it, like at tech conferences and things like that. We educate people about the things going on with mental health issues and how widespread they are. And we create resources like handbooks, videos, blog posts, all sorts of different kinds of things that we give away freely as a Creative Commons license, or if it's a code-based thing, we do an Apache license where we give all that stuff away. And like I said, it's a nonprofit organization, and I am actually stepping down from my CTO role, and I'm going to run this full time as my full-time job. I'm probably going to need to do consulting on the side for a while, just because that's the way that we have to build up and figure out how to bring in enough money to be able to draw a salary. But that's how that works right now, and I feel pretty confident that it's going to go well. It's been a thing where I've been talking about these things at tech conferences for about 5 years.
Oh
I've
wow.
given over 60 different talks over that period, and the response has been really, really amazing about just speaking openly about these things and trying to find solutions that people can draw on. And that's the key thing, is we're talking about it, but we're also trying to create the resources to help people the best way we can, for people who are IT professionals, people who work in the industry. So we're focused on tech. We're focused on IT professionals, both employers, the organizations, and employees, to help both of them know their rights and know their responsibilities and understand how to implement a culture that's supportive and at the same time helps people be more productive and reduces employee turnover, so that an organization, it's in their best interest to do these kinds of things, because their employees are going to work better and they're going to be less likely to leave. So that saves that company a lot of money. So that's basically that's what we do. That's what we do. And
Oh,
I have a team of about 15 to 20 volunteers right now,
wow.
who we work together to make these things happen.
Now, what comes to mind right now? So you and I both were kind of like from tech background, from programming and whatnot. Um, I'm thinking about how this came about. Why did you decided to do this, and what started all this for you?
Well, for me, I've been dealing with mental health issues my whole life, but happened is really that kicked off why am I doing these talks? Why did I start doing this? Is I I do a podcast with a friend of mine called Development Hell or Dev Hell with a guy
Mm-hmm.
named Chris Hartchess, who you might know as Grumpy Programmer.
Yeah, I'm
Um,
having him on coming interviews.
Uh-oh. Right, watch out for him. But anyway, yeah, he's a good guy. He's a good guy. And we did a podcast episode about and where I just talked about the kind of stuff that I've dealt with. And he he was very supportive of that, and we worked together on that stuff. And so we put this episode out that was about 4 or 5 years ago, and the response we got was amazing. By far, we've done 90 episodes now, and this was the 15th one we've done, and it is by far the one we got the most response from. Was this episode where I talked about the mental health issues that I have and how I struggle with that, and basically from there, I could tell that we had kind of really touched on something, and I decided that I could do this. That the best way for me to do this was to talk about it and keep talking and so I started presenting it as a talk I would give at tech conferences, and that's really where that started. Um, and so I've been doing this for several years, and it's grown from that into also doing research, to also doing creating these resources, to also manning tables at conferences and talking with companies and trying to help them. And it's really become something where just from that little podcast and an idea that we had, it's turned into a real nonprofit legal organization, with a number of volunteers, and it's growing just dramatically. And we're in the middle of a fundraiser right now for
Mm.
2017.
Oh,
So it's a very exciting thing for us. We are, of course, always looking for people who can financially help or just talk
mm.
about the kinds of things that we're doing and share it with other people. And it's really gone well. But that's how we got started, was just in that one podcast episode.
All right. So I don't know if this may get personal or whatnot, but if you're not comfortable about sharing it, then that is fine. But what comes to mind right now, I'm thinking about. You said you've been dealing with mental issues all your life, and you also
Yep,
mentioned
sure.
about. And another thing that you said was about how widespread it is. So if you don't
Hmm.
mind me asking,
Yeah,
what
sure.
kind? How is that?
Well, so for me, I deal with a couple different diagnoses, and they are generalized anxiety disorder and ADHD, or attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. Those are the two things that I deal with, and those are the sort of the challenges that I have. My What I found, if you talk about the widespread nature of it, in the U.S. at least, um, generally the numbers you see for the general population is about 20% of people deal with a mental health disorder in a given year, a diagnosable mental health disorder. So about 1 in every 5 people in the United States. Now, we've done surveys, and you have to remember that these are surveys where people choose to respond. So there's what you would call a self-selection bias to it. But the numbers that we see from our surveys, with over 1,500 respondents all over the world, is more like an incidence rate of about half of the people who responded. And these are people working in the tech industry. And they are reporting to us that about half of them report that they have a mental health disorder. I think the number is probably lower than that because of the self-selection bias, but
Mm-hmm.
I would guess that it's maybe 25 to 30% of people who work in IT are dealing with a mental health disorder right now, which is a very, very high number. but it's something that we don't really talk about. We don't
Mm-hmm.
talk about, you know, we don't talk about why this is happening. We don't talk openly about this, and it's very hard to solve any kind of public health issue if you don't, if you're not willing to discuss it. And so, as a consequence, I think that that's the first step to everything is speaking openly about these kinds of things. And that's really why I started with just speaking openly about it. Was for the purposes of trying to share my story and help other people understand that they're not alone in this. So there's actually lots of people who deal with these kinds of things, and that's where the whole thing gets started, I think.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So, for people who may not understand what
Mhm.
what this is, when you said about, I can only remember you said about ADHD, and I don't really recall what was the other one. So,
Generalized anxiety disorder.
so what are these like? So, and how is this affecting work or your yeah.
Well, generalized anxiety disorder is basically having a fight or flight response, like a fear response, when it's not appropriate to have one. So it's appropriate to have one when, like, if you're going to have to fight a lion or something like that,
Mm-hmm.
like that's an appropriate time to have a fight or flight response. It's not appropriate to have it like if you're going to meet some friends of yours at a bar and you're kind of you're so nervous and uncomfortable going into a place that you're not familiar with that you just like go home because you cannot handle sort of how uncomfortable it makes you feel.
Mm-hmm.
Basically, the reactions that you have, they're not reactions that are abnormal, but you're having them at the wrong times, and so that's sort of the generalized anxiety disorder part of things. With ADHD, it has a lot to do with my ability to stay focused on things and things that I want to do or don't want to do, and then it also has a lot to do with the level of emotion that I have, which is oftentimes my emotions come on strong and really fast, and I'll get frustrated quickly. So it's not just an attention thing, but oftentimes it's also how intense people's emotions can be. And those things kind of work together in that, and to make a difference in that way, so that oftentimes you have trouble. Your emotions get really intense. You get very worried quickly, and it's like if you imagine being very, very, very scared of something. Like if you were very afraid, like if somebody pulled a gun on you or something like that. But imagine having that reaction in a time where you're just like you're just at a party, and you just are so uncomfortable with all these people that you don't know being around you, that you have that same kind of reaction, that your heart starts beating really fast and your body tenses up and you feel pain like in your chest. That's the kind of thing that you're dealing with, and that's the kind of thing that I have, and it's a real challenge. It's a challenge every day because I have a chronic issue, but I just keep working on it. I keep dealing with that kind of stuff, and there's no shame in it. There's not
Mm-hmm.
something I've done wrong. It's just that that's the way that things are, and I have to just keep working on that every day to keep going.
Oh, okay. So, with your open sourcing mental illness,
Uh-huh.
uh, how does this help? Does it provide support for people with this kind of issues, or is it for the employers, for the employees? So,
Right.
how do you
Yeah.
help?
Well, the way that we help is by helping people understand how they can, the kinds of things like what their rights are, how to help and find resources. We help employees, people who are working in IT, by one, understanding that they're not alone, it's really common, that this is a common problem that people experience. This category of problems is very common. Understanding what their rights are, and understanding how the ways that they can go and seek help. And then as an employer, what we do is we help them understand how widespread the problem is, how it impacts their employees, and how treating them differently and establishing a culture of mental wellness improves their company productivity wise and also from a standpoint of employee retention. So we
Mm.
help them understand how to implement a program like that. So that's the kind of stuff that we do. And those are the main areas that we work. And that includes videos that we've created, that includes handbooks that we've created, all sorts of things, both for employers and employees.
Okay. Uh, so how has it been so far? How about from the employer point of view? Uh,
Mm-hmm.
can you share me an example or case where you've worked with an employer and how they are receiving it, and how it has helped the employer and the employee as well?
Ah, yes. Well, what we found is that we actually just got some feedback the other day that from somebody who had used our handbooks, and they had somebody come back from who was dealing with mental health problems, was able to return to work because they got the
Mm.
treatment that they needed, and now they're able to become again a productive member of their team. This is somebody who probably untreated would have lost that employee. That employee probably would have lost their job. They would have quit. They would have gone someplace else. So from a company standpoint, you have a productive employee returns to the job who otherwise they would have lost and had to have replaced.
Mm.
And there's significant financial costs related to the expense of dealing with employees who when they turn over. There's tens of thousands of U.S. dollars, at least over here, to replace an employee when they turn over like that.
Right.
So it makes a huge difference. It makes a huge difference, and because of that, there's major costs associated with that, and that's a kind of example of that. Our information that we provide can help people understand how to help their employees, how to help them be well, how to listen to them, how to help them in the best way possible. That's going to get them the treatment that they need.
Mm. I think in a way you're trying to improve the work environment for both parties so that the employee will get a better working environment and the employer will get the best out of the employee and more productivity and stuff like
Yes.
that.
Yes, it's in the interest of both the employer and the employee to do these kinds of things because you're going to end up with better productivity and you're going to be able to hold on to the people. And companies that do this kind of thing demonstrate that they are a company that you want to work at. They
Yeah,
demonstrate that.
yeah, I can understand when you said about the cost when an employee leaves. It's not just about the cost of recruiting a new employee to replace that, but it's also about the cost with the work that they left. And when
Right.
you hire somebody new, they have to pick it up and understand what's being developed or where they left off and stuff like that. So I think that's a huge loss when it comes to productivity, and when translated to money and cents, I can understand that can become a lot.
Oh yeah, enormously. So we have a partner program where we can work directly with companies who give us a certain amount of money, basically. And it is in the U.S. it's tax deductible and everything, but
Oh, great.
the amount of money that they give us is a small amount compared to the amount of money it would cost to just replace an employee.
Mm.
And so we think it's a really good idea and a really good move for these companies to do this. It's one of the most important things they can do to increase productivity and to lower costs is to take mental wellness seriously.
Okay, so how about this? I think some people are diagnosed maybe from early age or maybe from I don't know, maybe in their teens or during school time or maybe even before
Sure.
entering the workplace. But some people, they may think they have a situation, they may think they have it, but they were never diagnosed and they don't feel that it's
Right.
very um, what's the word that it's not as
Serious?
as serious, yeah.
Oh,
So,
okay.
what should somebody like that, whether they know they have it, or maybe somebody they think they have it,
Hmm.
what would be their next step? What should they do if they feel like they have a certain situation that, like what you just
Right.
explained?
Well, it's definitely the case that there are companies, or not companies. There are resources available to you that can create that you can do self analysis and sort of what they call self evaluation tools that gives
Mm-hmm.
you an idea of maybe what you're looking at, and
Mm-hmm.
that stuff is super helpful. The so really useful, very that can be helpful. And then really the next step would be, see if you feel like that is the case. There's no harm in seeking out somebody and like going to a medical professional and saying, I have a suspicion that maybe this is going on. Can we just talk about this and figure that out and get an evaluation done by a mental health professional? And there's no harm in it. If it turns out that it doesn't seem like that's going to be an issue, that's perfectly fine. But so there's no harm in going ahead and doing it. But what there is plenty of helpful stuff can happen from that. If there is something that you need to worry about, then or you need to work on, not worry about, but work on,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
then you can do that with the guidance of a mental health professional. If there
Mm-hmm.
isn't, well, there's no harm in it.
Mm-hmm.
So you might as well go and try to get an evaluation done. But there are like self evaluations you can do, and they're linked off our website under our resources. So you could try those. I don't know what's say available in Malaysia, but I know in the United States there's a few different good websites that have a number of different self evaluation tools that can kind of get you started with stuff.
Mm-hmm. And let's say it is confirmed positive, and you do have a
Sure.
situation like that, and you want to be more productive in work. You want to improve your work environment. What can they do?
Uh-huh. What I'd say is it's probably a longer discussion than we can have here, but I
Mm-hmm.
think the first step is you go to our website and you get the handbooks that we have available, and
Yeah.
those are the first step to finding that information out and getting that information, making it available. It's useful stuff there. They are free. You can give us you can get them on LeanPub, but they're
Mm-hmm.
linked from our website, which is osmihelp.org. That's osmihelp.org.
All right.
And you just go under the resources section, and that will have information on our handbooks that you can go and download for free.
Great. I think that's a great help, and that is um, something that we can get started with. Uh, yeah, I think we're coming to the end. We've covered quite a
Sure.
lot. Thank you for I think you've shared a lot about um,
Great.
your career, your PHP experience, and
Hmm.
also about Python as well.
Yeah.
Um,
Uh-huh.
how about this? Any last words that you may have? Uh, if you have any last words for people who may be dealing with programmers, technical people, and IT professionals who may
Hmm.
be dealing with something like this.
Well, what I'd say is there's nothing wrong with you. You're not broken. You're not stupid. You're not lazy. You just have some stuff that you're working on that you're trying to figure out, and you have a health problem. And there is no shame and no harm in going and getting that checked out. And remember that it's something that you'll probably need help from a professional with. It's not
Mm-hmm.
something, I don't try to do surgery on myself.
Mm-hmm.
And I try to find somebody who's an expert in the area to try to solve these things for me. And that's, I think, one of the biggest things is there's no harm in asking for help. And if you need a little bit of help with something, go ahead and check it out. And if you need it, that's great. And if it turns out that you get by okay without it, that's okay too. But there's no harm in checking it out and seeing if you need a little bit of help. Nobody, people, maybe somebody will judge you, but they're not worth it. What's worth it is your happiness and your health. And those things are more important than any job or any amount of pay that you can get.
All right, good advice. And also, you said about
Yeah.
you're doing a fundraising right now. So how can people get
Yeah.
involved with that?
If you go to OSMI Help, that's OSMIHELP.org, and then if you just go to /donate, DONATE, you can go ahead and there's a number of things that we have there, including like PHP conference tickets. We have signed copies of Laravel up and running. We have lots of different gifts you can get for donating stuff, including training materials, training videos, all sorts of different stuff. Or you can just give an amount of money and you don't have to get anything. But everybody who donates will get a free book that's written by Cal Evans, who's a pretty well-known person in the PHP community, and a pack of stickers. So everybody who donates at least $15 will get that. But then there's lots of other gifts that you can get too for different donation levels. So I think there's a lot of cool stuff to check out.
All right. I think this has been great. I think I learned a lot, and I think our listeners and our audience are going to learn a lot as well. And yeah, thank you for doing this with me, Ed.
No problem.
I
No, this
think,
is lots of fun.
yeah, probably we'll catch up again later.
Okay, that sounds great. And I will talk to you soon.
Okay, bye bye.